Dr. Andy Wright is our guest for this portion of the show, and we're here to discuss The Anxious Generation, the book that we've talked about a little bit on this program prior to that. But wanted to kind of get an overview of this. And Dr. Wright, tell us a little bit about the book and what you've learned so far.
Sure. Yeah, this book is by Jonathan Haidt. He's a well-known social psychologist out of NYU. He wrote a previous book called The Coddling of the American Mind, where in general terms he argues that children are anti-fragile unless we increase their fragility, and what we need to do to keep that. And so this, I think, grew out of that. And this book, The Anxious Generation, which was from a few years back, so what's not covered in here is AI. So we'll briefly touch on it at the end because that's not part of this book. So this was just published last year, 2024. That's how fast things move.
Oh, yeah.
It's divided into 4 parts. He kind of lays out the problem in part 1, talks about the shift of play-based childhood to phone-based childhood in part 2. And then in part 3, he talks about sort of the rise of phone-based childhood. And then in part 4, what can we do to improve, I guess, the way we develop our kids, and the way we interact with them, and the way they'll become adults. As a social psychologist, he's worried about the mental health of a population as opposed to an individual psychologist who's worried about the mental health of the person in front of them. Yeah.
Right. And us as parents and grandparents, obviously we can complain about kids and too much screen time all we want, but it starts with us, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. He doesn't address that very much in the book, but it absolutely starts with us. He calls this the anxious generation, but actually Gen X has a lot of anxiety, and we have a lot of screen time ourselves. I'm glad you brought that up. We have to model good screen behavior. As an aside, we've seen an increase in expressive speech delay in young children, and almost certainly that is because we as parents are on our devices not engaging those children in speech. It's easily corrected. Once the parents who want the best for their kids learn these techniques, which are simply reading stories, modeling speech, naming things that the child points to, these kids quickly progress.
Mm-hmm. And certainly we have known a different generation when this doesn't go on. Most of the kids today, especially kids that are having kids, have always had cell phones in their pockets.
That's right. And so, this is about Gen Z, and that generation is folks who were born from 1995 to 2010, roughly. So they started their adolescence about 2009. The smartphone really came into its own in 2010. That was iPhone 4, and that's the first year they had the camera on the front side, so you could take pictures of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And social, social platforms and those kind of things, and all of those things that comes into play when we're talking about bullying and everything else.
Absolutely.
Right?
He outlines. So we've had these sort of landmark technological events, right? We've had the radio, then we had the TV, then we had the color TV, then we had the personal computer, then we had the internet, and then we jumped to the smartphone, more or less after that, right? And so social media started, about 2002. You had Facebook, Friendster, and MySpace, kind of in those early 2000s. And they made a pivot in 2009, which he mentions in the book. They went from sort of emphasizing social networking and connection to becoming sort of, particularly Facebook, because the other two aren't even around.
Yeah, I know.
Is sort of a profit-driven platform, company, really, with multiple platforms. And so he makes this point at the end of the book, but I think it's important to mention at the beginning. We are not the customers of Meta. You and I, if I have a Facebook account, we are not the customers of Facebook. The customers are the advertisers and the investors, meaning we are the users. And so everything is geared towards getting us to use more so that the customers, ad agencies and investors, get more profit.
When parents come to you, Dr. Wright, then with their children, what are some of the concerns that they generally have?
Yeah, so we're jumping ahead, but that's okay because he talks about essentially anxiety and depression increasing because of this change from play-based childhood to phone-based childhood. And by phone-based, he's including other screens. He's including gaming consoles. It's just an easier term to use. And so the most vulnerable period is the 9 to 15 age range. For girls, it's particularly 9 to 13, and for boys, it's 14, 15. And I'll just give you an example that illustrates. He says these are general broad terms. Certainly there are boys in the girl category and girls in the boy category. Let's be clear. But in general, the biggest sort of vulnerability for girls is the social media, more so than boys. Across the board, anxiety and depression have increased in boys and girls, and we should probably define those. Anxiety, fear is you and I are afraid of something that's an imminent danger, right? Whether it's real or perceived. That's not anxiety. Anxiety is when we are fretting about things that probably won't happen. It's a lot of what if this, what if that. It becomes pathological or unhealthy if it's paralyzing us or causing us not to do certain things or do other things. That's an anxiety disorder. Depression is not just sadness. Sadness is part of life. That's normal. Grieving is normal. Depression is sort of an unhealthy amount of sadness or hopelessness, like there's an emptiness or a hole and we can't see a way out. So to get back to your original question, a typical scenario would be a teen girl coming to my office with sort of an acute situational depression or anxiety. And that is frequently related to probably the most common scenario is they had a group of friends. They thought they were good friends. And then a post will go out on social media sort of just denigrating their reputation, misconstruing things, and suddenly that's not a normal interaction, right? So that means lots of people receive that message, and then that person is instantly ostracized and has a sense of self that just plummets. And it can be extremely dangerous, right? In the media, we've seen cases of suicide from that. I took a lot of notes because this was a rich book with a lot of material. So he lays out why girls are more vulnerable to social media than boys. Now, let's be clear. It's affected boys and girls. Depression and anxiety has increased in both groups. Particularly, he identifies that window from 2010 to 2015 when social media was really ramping up. The selfie age, if you will. And it's only increased since that window. He says that in general, and this is based on countless studies of socializing. So one might nitpick, I'm not like that. Okay, fine. But these are population-based. So girls are more vulnerable. They're affected by visual, social comparison, and perfectionism. So the whole idea of the beauty filter, right? And then just you're trying to get to that next level. He even talks about an Olivia Rodrigo song called Jealousy. So I listened to it, and it's a really good song. Kind of lays out the problem and the frustration very well. So that's number one. Number two is for girls, more so than boys, aggression is relational or in relationships, hence the example we gave where you're kind of sabotaging somebody's friend network. Number three, there's 4 points here. Girls are more open about sharing their emotions or disorders, so that makes them more vulnerable. But it also leads to some curious findings. For example, in Germany, there was an epidemic of teens going to their doctors saying they had Tourette's. And any skilled doctor would know they don't have Tourette's. And it was from an influencer in Germany on TikTok who was just doing these things. And he didn't even have Tourette's, I don't think. And then in the U.S., there was sort of this epidemic of dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personality disorder. And it was from a TikToker named Asher. And so then all these people thought they had it. So that's an example of if you're more open about emotions, then you can be susceptible to this. And then the final point is girls are more subject to predation and harassment on social media. So anybody can set up an account, fake their identity. So if you have predators, right, they can get on and just start grooming a girl about, and then ultimately one of the most destructive things that happens is the sending of nude pictures, which is unfortunately not uncommon. And as a society, if a boy does that, not always, sometimes the consequences are devastating, but it's more, he'll get teased. But if a girl does that, it ruins her reputation. And there's been high-profile cases of this. The BBC did some reporting recently about how people's lives are, and for the rest of their life, they're dealing with that trauma from this space. So, yeah.
What about from the boy standpoint then, Dr. Wright?
So for the boys, his emphasis is a little different. And again, I want to emphasize, you can have girls in the boy category and boys in the girl category. Let's be clear here. And then you can have people who don't identify with the gender that have these as well. He talks about sort of the consequences of what's happening to boys, and then I'll get into the boy issues. Is we end up with men in their late 20s who are, sort of the cliche is living in their parents' basement. And so in Japan, they actually have a term for that called hikikomori. And that means pulling inward. And these are men in their 20s and 30s who never leave home, and we don't know if they will. In the U.S. and in Britain, they have a term called NEAT, and that is an acronym standing for not in education, not in employment, and not in training. And so for boys, they're more susceptible to sort of a video game addiction. Well, there's sort of 4 levels of video game usage, which I'll mention, and then also pornography. Probably the most staggering statistic, and this may be an underestimate, is 1 in 4 teenage boys is consuming, and he distinctly talks about more of the what we would call hardcore pornography, is consuming pornography daily, so 25%. And so that means overall usage is probably more 1 in 3. So it's staggering. What's also happened as we move away from play-based childhood to phone-based childhood is in the past, when girls had adolescence, they always had internalizing issues, depression, anxiety. Those are internalizing disorders, right? A certain percentage going up. Boys in the past would have externalizing disorders, antisocial behavior, putting the fireworks in the frog, or bullying other kids. But they've shifted now, since they're not socializing normally. They shifted to more internalizing disorders, increase in anxiety and depression.
At what point, Dr. Wright, do parents come into play? Because obviously, controlling that screen time, but one of the things that I've always thought too is to, I don't know if you want to, force is the right word, but to make them be social, like at family gatherings, get away from the stupid game, come out here and talk to people, look them in the eye. But I mean, what's the approach that a parent should take?
Yeah, so forcing rarely works.
Yeah.
Let's be frank, and my wife reminds me of that all the time whenever I want to discipline my children with force. And she's right. She's absolutely right. Before I answer that question, let me back up to sort of the 4. He has many recommendations, but he has 4 key recommendations. And he uses the book. He mentions them at the beginning and the end of the book, and he uses uses the book to sort of justify these 4 recommendations. I think he does a good job. Number 1 is no smartphones before high school age. Number 2 is no social media before 16 years old. And there's science to back that up. We talked about sort of the vulnerable period, right, of where your brain is, you're about 80% brain developed by your preteen, teen years. But that last 20% is your frontal and prefrontal cortex. That's identity, that's decision making, that's life planning. And so that can, and it's socialization, and that can really be damaged. I guess advanced socialization. Obviously, socialization starts with birth or before birth. So number 1 is no smartphones pre-high school. Number 2 is no social media pre-16 years old. Number 3 is phone-free schools, where they're locked not in a bag, but in a locker or in what he talks about is sort of a, they make bags that are sort of electrically locked, and they can't be opened unless there's a code. And then the 4th recommendation is more unsupervised play. One of his, and this is from the Coddling of the American Mind, one of his principal arguments is we don't expose kids to appropriate dangers in the context of socializing. You and I, I'm sure, grew up playing kick the can, playing capture the flag. We had a game called Bloody Murder. Mm-hmm. These were neighborhood games. Fortunately, in rural areas and small towns, we still have a bit more of that than I think big cities, although some neighborhoods and cities do a good job of this. But overall, as a society, and not just American society, right, we're talking about Europe. We're talking about Australia, Canada, a lot of what we would call, advanced or developed nations. It's not the best term, but we've decreased this unsupervised play. So what happens is if we think of the two things that motivate us are agency and communion, right? So we have a desire to he goes over this in the book, individualize ourselves, and make a name for ourselves, if you will, and that starts when we're very young, right? You remember the movies Sandlot or Stand By Me. Those are good examples of people trying to have agency. But the other motivator is communion. We want to be in a group. We want to be part of that group, and we're motivated to do that. Well, in play, unstructured play, you have to negotiate those things, right? You have to make rules for tag. He talks about a park in Berkeley, California, that had laid out all the rules for like playing tag, and any disputes will be decided by rock, paper, scissors. And well, that's not unstructured play. That's someone trying to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Overcoach.
Overcoach or everything.
Yeah.
So he talks about more unstructured. So that's one of his 4 main recommendations. And then in the 4th part of the book, he goes into detail of how this can be accomplished for society, parents, teens. I'll return to your question. You said parents. All right, so get back to parents. So he's got a whole section on specifically what parents can do. We may as well go over it now. The first, this is 7 points. So he says parents need to take the time to learn about the safety devices on the smartphone. So learn about how to place filters. Learn about how to place parent controls. Don't just hand your kid a phone and say, go wild. Number 2 is they should emphasize in-person time with their children, right? And then limit the amount of media time in a structured way. After supper, you get 1 hour of your smartphone, and being able to enforce that. Provide a structure at home. We have a regular dinner time, we have a regular bedtime, and we have a regular media time. And we have media free time. You might even structure in what he calls a sabbatical day, where you have 1 day a week, maybe like a Tuesday or a Monday, where it would be a media free day. He's not suggesting these are easy, but he's suggesting they're important. Number 4 is you have to look for signs of addiction level use. I wanted to, before I forgot about it, there is a very brief sort of questionnaire. It's called the Gaming Addiction Scale for Adolescents. And basically, statistically, we know 1 in 14 boys, it will be addicted to video games. Addicted means they'll skip a meal, they'll skip a shower, they'll skip their sleep to keep playing. Fortunately, that's the smallest group of users. The other 3 levels, I guess we'll start from least harmful to most. So there's the casual gamer, there's the engaged gamer, there's the problematic gamer, and there's the addicted gamer. And if you just would get online and you just Google gaming addiction scale for adolescents, go through that scale, you'll have a sense of where your kid's at. And if your kid is in that problematic or addicted range, it's time to have a conversation. The easiest way to define it is it's how much time you spend on it. So it's very similar to, say, alcohol, which is sort of and marijuana, both dose-dependent harms, right? The more you use, the more harmful it can be. The fellow who has 1 alcoholic drink in 24 hours, that's not harmful drinking, right? The fellow who has a 12-pack every night, that's harmful drinking. Similarly with hours spent on this. So back to what parents can do. Number 5 is to be diligent about the social media. Doesn't start till 16 years old, because the fragility of our psyche and the developmental way we're built, and the way we should socialize. Number 6 is just kind of regular talks, check-ins, listen and talk, spend time with your child. And then I added number 7 because he mentions it several times, and that is that device should be locked up or in the parents' room 30 minutes before bedtime, so a child can unwind, a teen can unwind. I think he would have that recommendation till the end of high school. There you go.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too, because you want to regulate the fact that they're not on their personal device all night long or something. So if you've got access to it and you can keep it in your room, that'd be a good way to keep it away from them.
Yeah. In fact, if as a parent you're like, well, boy, you just mentioned a bunch of things, I don't know where to start. I would start there. I would make that hard decision. You're going to have a child who, or a teen or a preteen who's going to be very rebellious, right? But if you, as a single parent, or hopefully as reunited front, can stick to that one rule, you've probably done tremendous good for your child.
From an adult standpoint too, Dr. Wright, we need to get away from the screens because that does affect our sleep lots of times.
Yeah. And he doesn't even talk about that at all in the book, which is a little frustrating, but I couldn't agree with you more, Phil, is that I need to model that same behavior. 30 minutes before I go to bed, I need to get off my phone. Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
And that all being said, all of these devices are good used in the proper form. We use them every single day.
Absolutely. In fact, to prepare for this interview, I listened to half the book at 1.5 speed while I was doing lawn work, while I was taking a long bike ride. So these devices can be incredibly useful. They're very powerful devices, and it's not using them. It's using them well. Yeah.
Recently, there's been talk about cell phone policy at Richland Center High School as well. Would you like to comment on any of that?
So I don't know where it stands. I don't know if there's been a vote on it. I think he makes a very compelling argument. He does mention a study called Brain Drain. I don't remember. One group was a control group. One group was can have the smartphone in your bag but can't use it. The other one, the control group, can use them ad lib. One was keep it in the locker. I don't think the results are finalized on that yet. It's what we have seen is smaller studies that definitely demonstrate improved test scores, which I think is a lower priority, but we'll get to that later. Decrease conflicts, so fewer fights, fewer detentions, fewer expulsions, and then you have teachers report much better attention and engagement in the subjects. So to me, it seems like an obvious thing to do. Anytime something new comes, we don't know what to do, right? So we just let it go, or we experiment with it. And in this case, now we have data. Now we see the harm, right? And so we need to take action. We need to change what we're doing, right? So another example is the drinking age used to be 18, right? And we saw more accidents, more death. And so you move that drinking age to 21, you see fewer deaths. And so, we thought 18 was fine, but then we got data that said it wasn't fine. This is a similar situation.
Partners for Prevention oftentimes talk about the effects of alcohol on the developing brain, you should postpone it until your mid-20s even, if possible. But, as you were talking about it, Dr. Wright, it's kind of the same thing with cell phones and personal device in terms of waiting till you're 16, or at least, your brain is better developed, right?
Yeah, and he sort of goes... I'll say two things. One, social interactions. This may seem obvious, but I think we forget this. He talks about the difference between social and virtual interactions right at the start of the book. A social interaction is embodied. You and I are sitting in front of each other right now and talking, so we can see each other's body language. That's a social interaction, right? It's synchronous. We're both here at the same time, right? We're not texting back and forth. It involves one-on-one or one between, say, several people, but not a multitude, not a million people. So that's a social interaction. And then there's a high bar for entry, right? One of the reasons I'm in this social interaction is because I'm a physician, right? So one of the reasons you talk to someone after work is because they're your friend, right? There's a bar for entry. Whereas a virtual interaction is the opposite of all those things. It's disembodied, right? It's just words on a screen or a face on a screen. It's not... there's no body there, right? And in fact, now we have AI creating virtual people, and some people can't distinguish the two, as we found out. It's asynchronous, right? I put something out there on a social media site. People can look at it for the next 100 years if they like. It is out to zillions, right? Now that started with the printing press, right? Gutenberg gave the opportunity to see the written word to lots. But here we are with, if you have a million followers, everyone's going to see it, right? And then the last one, it's a very low bar for entry. It's such a low bar that there could be predators and criminals who can enter into that interaction.
And there often are. Yeah. Scary stuff.
Yeah.
It really is. Anything else you want to add before we get to AI? Because I know that's a whole another can of worms.
It's another can of worms that she doesn't touch on here. We can briefly touch on it. I wanted to, this might be a segue. I would just want to add sort of the resources he gives at the end. I'm only going to mention 4 of them because I think they're important. One is the website for this book called anxiousgeneration.com. And there's a brief section on errata, which means errors in the book. And one of the pleasant errors in the book is he talks about one of the ways that society can help this is to, pass a law to require age verification. And he gives an example of Louisiana. But in the book, he says they were using IDs, and so then people could see personal information. It's true that Louisiana has a law. It's true that they have a verification system that initially uses the ID, but that's through a third party, so no personal data is stored online. So, for example, a website like Pornhub, the most used pornography website or platform in the world, cannot, because of their verification system, a person has to be 18, and it can be verified in Louisiana. Now, we're in a sad state when states have to do this. That's my personal thing. This should be a national thing. So that's anxiousgeneration.com. The second one is a Substack that he has, but he doesn't really run it. It's run by the head researcher for this book. His name is Zach. It's called After Babel. So if people are into Substack, which I think a lot of us are now, it's a way to get alternative media. You could go to After Babel, and there's a paid option, but you can also get it for free. In his book, he says it's free, and indeed, you can sign up for free. You don't have to pay a cent. The 2 websites I want to highlight are commonsensemedia.com. I've used that website in my clinic. It gives parents sort of toolkits on how to talk to different ages of kids, what's appropriate media use at different ages of kids. Before I give you the last website, let me give you those right now. 0 to 18 months or 0 to 2, depending on which organization you talk to, no smartphone use except for live video chats with, say, family, right? Grandma and grandpa want to see the baby. That's it. 2 to 5 or 2 to 6, depending on which group you're talking about. You're talking about educational programming of 30 minutes a day, more or less, right? And then you move to 6 to 9 or 6 to 10, up to 2 hours a day. And that can be, it should be curated by the parents, but that can be games, you just don't want it to be harmful content. And then we get into the sort of preteen, what we would call pre-social media age, and things can widen out. Maybe you go 3 hours, maybe 4, depending what's happening in that. And then you get into social media in high school. So that's all detailed on that website, commonsensemedia.com. And the final one is called the Center for Humane Technology. And the reason this is the segue is because they are on the cutting edge. They often, one of their experts will go to Congress and testify, and that website's www.humanetech.com. And they're on the front foot. And so they're right now they have a lot of articles about AI on the website, and sort of this. Here we are again. We're not regulating; it's unfettered. Finally, a big emphasis in the book is the age of safetyism, which started in the 80s, really picked up in the 90s, and this is immediately recognizable to those of us who are from Generation X. We had merry-go-rounds, and there was a potential for a little bit of damage, maybe even a broken bone, maybe stitches required, right? Every now and then you heard a horror story of some kid getting their finger pinched off, although I never saw that personally. Loved merry-go-rounds. He says that's one of the best toys out there because you have to negotiate with a group. You have to negotiate safety. There's a bit of danger, an acceptable amount of danger. You might get a bell ringer if you fall off the side, but you're not going to sever a limb. There's always a rare case, right? But and so this safetyism predates play-based childhood to phone-based childhood, but it's of the same ilk, where we're just trying to protect, and what we're doing is we're taking away a child's ability to develop resilience. He uses the analogy of a plant, a tree, any plant. If it's not in the wind, it doesn't develop strong enough structures to stay upright. It falls over. It needs to have the wind to develop it. And so that's a major theme in the book for the right reasons.
Does he get into spirituality?
Yes, he does. He has a section on it. So he identifies as an atheist, which in some ways gives his spiritual chapter a little more credibility, ironically, or paradoxically. So he identifies spiritual practices that I think many of us who do have a spiritual practice will immediately identify with. You have a shared sacredness, right? You have a sort of a shared space, shared sacredness. There's embodiment, meaning there's personal involvement and group involvement. There's stillness, silence, and focus. That is a common theme of deep spiritual practices throughout the world. There's a transcendence of oneself, meaning you're thinking of the other, you're thinking of something greater than you, a source of love. That's common to spiritual practices. Also common to spiritual practices is slow to anger, quick to forgive. So this idea of taking a step back, having a sense of mercy. He quotes, I'm going to paraphrase a Buddhist quote. He says, "Only love dispels hate. Hate never dispels hate." So that's true. You could say that only light dispels darkness. Darkness never dispels darkness. That's impossible. And then the final one is finding awe in nature. So as an atheist, he wouldn't identify a creator, but he's still able to find awe in nature. And so that connection to the natural world is essential. So he does touch on that as an essential part of being a human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then AI. We was going to touch on that. You said it wasn't mentioned in the book, but when you were talking about different things, it seems to me when it comes into bullying, and you can show a naked picture of somebody. It's not them, right?
Right. Yeah. So here we are again. So we've over legislated the real world, right? We have satiism. We have really boring parks, and we've under-legislated the virtual world, right? So we have no holds barred. He gives a brief story about in the U.S. we have the Childhood Online Protection Act, and the leader on that really was pushing for 16 as the entry point for adulthood and on social media and other devices, but the compromise was 13. So here we have this under legislation, and so AI is in the same boat. We are somehow in the trance of, almost like a necromancer trance, of these really smart people in tech. This would be someone like Sam Altman, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg. And we're just saying, oh, sure. But they don't have a moral center, right? So we had a whistleblower, Frances Hogan. She worked at Meta for years, and she then whistleblew how they use sort of deceptive behavioral motivational practices, how they, just like the cigarette companies did, how they target younger and younger and younger. So it's truly a race to the bottom. And she came out with this. So there's something called variable reward. And these are theories that were propounded by a professor at Stanford. And the idea is you have a trigger. The biggest trigger today would be, say, a notification or a ping on your phone. So, for example, for me, I have Spotify. At the end of the year, I get a ping that they've got my curated list of songs. That's my trigger. Then there's an action, right? It's my action. I take an action. I want to check that list out. I want to listen to those songs, right? I take that action. I'm using that product. And then I have variable reward. Sometimes it's, oh, yeah, that's a great song. And sometimes I don't know how that got on my list. By doing variable rewards, they found out with animals and with humans, we're more likely to stay invested because we want that dopamine squirt in our brain. We're waiting for the big reward, sort of like a gambler who just keeps pulling the slot, because they had that experience once of all three showing up. So you don't give them the same reward every time. And then there's investment, right? So the investment on my Spotify thing is it's personally curated to me. So say an investment on a social media site would be, why don't you add a little something right here? And then it goes back and you get triggered again. And that whole cycle just keeps playing out. And by that, they get you more and more attached. This is very sophisticated psychology. Very good movie. Netflix did a movie in 2020 called The Social Dilemma, which lays this out. All of this to say AI is going to take that to the next level. The algorithms to keep us strolling on what some people call it death, right? What is it called? what's the word I'm looking for? Scrolling, death scrolling.
Oh.
Yeah. Or if I'm scrolling on YouTube, I'll get that variable reward. I don't want to see that video. Oh, there's a video I really like. So in AI, we're going to have that on another level, right? We're going to have literally algorithms and computers that have quote unquote learned, right? It's not learning in the human sense. There's no soul, meaning it's learning without a moral center. We have to be very clear on that. There's no moral center in any of this. We'll be able to know exactly what I want when I want it, right? And so it's going to take it to another level, and it's unregulated. That's dangerous. We could. And this has been written about in science fiction a lot, is you get to a level where it's just always the device. Always, you're never off the virtual world, and the real world really starts to atrophy.
I was just thinking about that. If you would have written a science fiction movie in the 70s or 80s,
Right.
people may have thought, man, that's way too far-fetched. That'll never happen. And now we're kind of living through it, aren't we?
Yeah, I read, this must be 10 years ago, I read a really good science fiction story. It was a short story. And this guy was essentially a mercenary, and he had a device in his pocket, and it would tell him what his next move should be. And he was always staying one move ahead, 2 or 3 moves ahead, except for this AI device, because this was AI. It was artificial intelligence telling him to do this. Was corrupted, infiltrated by a rival. And so it gave him a move that was too slow and not fast enough, and he realized it too late, and he ends up dying. So with our complete dependence on AI, that's an outcome that could happen.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Do you recommend the book?
I highly recommend the book. It was interesting because my wife and I had some spirited discussions. She thought that his overemphasis on the division between boys and girls was an issue, so I wanted to be clear on that. But I think the main message of this book, he puts together things that we sort of intuitively had a sense of, and he has the research that says you're right to be concerned about this, and then he gives us sort of a plan of what can we do. And what makes it fascinating to me is the underpinning of social psychology, right? Several things I mentioned. There's a few other sort of concepts I didn't mention. Just this idea that we're motivated by agency and communion. So once you understand these things, it makes it easier to think otherwise. I want to leave on a happy note. And so he talks about in Europe, Northern Europe in particular, they have parks, and there's a few in the U.S. They call them junk parks. And what they are is unbuilt parks. You go to the park, and there's just tires laying around. There's boards, and the kids build the stuff to play with. Some of it might be a little dangerous. Well, it'll fall over. And the idea is we have to resist over supervision. Now, he doesn't advocate under supervision, but I would guess you and me, I was walking the streets at 5-6 years old in Kewanee, Wisconsin, and you just don't see that anymore. So that's a big thrust of his, is that we have to have this spontaneous play with a little bit of danger.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating stuff. If anybody has questions, where's a good place to go?
Well, I would say that website, theanxiousgeneration.com, and then I think the ones that kind of give tools, Common Sense Media and Humane Tech, Center for Humane Technology. I think those are good. These things come up in visits, so I feel like I've also gained some more tools to talk with parents and with teens and preteens.
Yeah, we're 5 years past COVID, too. That's something that we didn't touch on, but that's another thing that kind of emphasizes.
It was a perfect storm, right?
It was.
So we have 2010 to 2015 with this sort of smartphone uptake by kids, preteens, teens. We're already sort of moving away from each other's social interaction, right? There's studies of how much time do you spend in person with friends was already decreasing. And then you have COVID. And so in 2020, boom, nobody's seeing each other, right? And then we have to balance safetyism and common sense better, right? So in the postmortem, if you will, we realize now that masks were probably not beneficial in grade schools. I may be saying something terribly controversial, but it's really not controversial. On the flip side, we know that the vaccine helped those with risk factors, right? Risk factors being hypertension, age greater than 60, diabetes, and obesity. Those are the biggest risks. And so science needs to say, hey, we were wrong about the masks, and countries like Norway eliminated masks early on, and they had a uptick initially in deaths in those vulnerable populations, but their overall deaths were the same as countries that masked. Yeah. So, but to your point, so we're climbing out of a hole, and thankfully, hopefully we're out of that hole, and hopefully some of these trends improve. Hopefully we'll see a decrease in anxiety and depression as we now are maybe a little smarter about the importance of engaging with each other, being very mindful of how to use these devices from age 0, from the time a child's born, being mindful that 0 to 2 is a critical time for bonding with parents, but also 9 to 15 is a critical, all these ages are critical for different reasons, but 9 to 15 is critical time for frontal brain development, decision making, sort of gaining your identity and what kind of vocation you're going to follow. It's critical time.
We had guests from Richland Center District in here talking about a screenless summer, and I mean that's a good theme. But now we should get out, right, and maybe do a little hiking this summer, and do some things with the kids outside that don't involve electronics. Right?
Do things with the kids, and let the kids do things with kids without us hovering.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yep. The old days of picking teams and playing a ball game instead of having a league and coaches and all those things. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously you go near water, be mindful, but if it's only 1 inch of water, let them play.
Let them go. The book is The Anxious Generation. Dr. Wright, thanks so much. It's been a great conversation today.
Well, thank you, Phil. Thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. Dr. Wright joining us in this portion of the morning show. We'll have more about this and Partners for Prevention coming up on the show.